My sister stole my fiancé 1 week before my wedding, but when they both died 6 years later, my family asked me to adopt their daughter, and I gave them an answer they'll never forget. I'm 29 years old. I work as an event coordinator at a marketing company, and honestly, I still can't believe my life ended up being this. Because, about 6 years ago, I was planning my wedding, you know? I had the dress, the invitations were already printed, we had reserved this beautiful venue downtown, and everything seemed absolutely perfect. Tyler and I had been together for 3 years. We met in college. He was studying engineering. I was in communications. And when he proposed to me on that beach in Cancun during spring break, I swear I thought my life couldn't get any better. It was one of those moments you see in movies. You know what I mean? With the sunset and everything. I was 23, he was 25, and we were ready to start our life together. I guess I should talk a bit about my family, so this makes sense. I grew up with my parents and my younger sister Morgan, who's 4 years younger than me. Parents spoiled her in everything. And when I say everything, I mean everything. If I got good grades, great. It was expected of me. If Morgan got a C in math, my parents celebrated like she'd won the Nobel Prize. You know that type of family dynamic where one kid can do whatever and the other always has to be the responsible one? Well, that. I was the older daughter, the one who had to set an example, the one who couldn't fail. Morgan was the baby, the princess, the one who always needed protection and understanding. But anyway, I thought that was normal. That's how families worked, and that when we grew up things would change. They didn't change. Tyler met my family 6 months after we started dating. Morgan was about 19 at the time. She was in college. Well, technically she was enrolled, but she barely went to classes. And I remember when Tyler met her, he told me she was fun. Fun. I should have paid more attention to that. But I was so in love and so happy that I didn't see the signs. Because the signs were there. Looking back, I can see them clearly. The way Morgan always found excuses to be around when Tyler came over. How she laughed too loud at his jokes. How she suddenly became interested in football, which she'd never liked, just because Tyler played on Sundays with his friends. But I thought, she's my little sister. She's just being friendly, right? When Tyler and I got engaged, Morgan was one of the first people we told. She hugged me, told me she was happy for me. That Tyler was amazing. I even asked her to be one of my bridesmaids. She said yes. Everything seemed perfect. Literally perfect. We started planning the wedding for a year out, because I'm one of those people who needs time to organize everything properly, you know? I wanted it to be special, memorable, the most beautiful day of my life. What I didn't know, what I had no idea about, is that basically 2 weeks after we got engaged, Morgan started flirting with Tyler more, directly. And he, that damn coward, played along. I don't know exactly how it all started. Honestly, I never wanted to know the details because they make me want to throw up. But apparently she would text him, he would respond, they would meet up in secret, and I, like an idiot, kept planning my wedding while my sister and my fiancé were sleeping together behind my back. The thing is, this went on for months. Months where I was tasting wedding cakes, choosing flowers, arguing with the venue coordinator about table arrangements. Months where Tyler would kiss me in the mornings and tell me he loved me, and then go meet up with Morgan. 2 months where Morgan would come home on Sundays for family dinners and help me fold napkins for the centerpieces while pretending to be excited about my wedding. The level of betrayal is something I still don't completely process. My brain sometimes just refuses to believe it. 1 week before the wedding, literally 7 days away, my parents asked me to come to their house for an important family meeting. I remember thinking maybe they wanted to give me some special gift or talk about last-minute preparations. I arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, around 6. He had just gotten off work, and when I walked into the living room, everyone was there. My parents on the couch with serious faces, Tyler standing by the window, unable to look me in the eye, and Morgan sitting in the armchair with her hands on her lap. And I just stood there in the doorway thinking, what's going on? Because the tension was so thick you could literally cut it with a knife. My father was the one who spoke first. He said, "Hannah, we need to talk about something very important and very difficult." And I still didn't understand. My brain wasn't processing what was about to happen. Then Morgan looked up, and her eyes were red like she'd been crying, and she said in a shaky voice, "I'm pregnant." And I thought, okay, That's a problem, but why did they call me? Why? Is Tyler here? Why is no one looking at me? My mother took a breath and said, The baby is Tyler's. The baby is Tyler's and Morgan is 9 weeks pregnant. I swear the world stopped. Like I literally felt the floor disappear from under my feet. I stood there with my bag still hanging from my shoulder, looking at these people who supposedly loved me, and I couldn't process the words. 9 weeks. 9 weeks. That meant that. Lies. Everything had been lies for over 2 months. For 2 months, while I coordinated the final details of my wedding, while I sent out final confirmations to guests, while I dreamed about my future with this man, he had been getting my sister pregnant. I think the first thing I said was, This is a joke, right? Because it couldn't be real. It just couldn't be real. But then Tyler finally looked at me and he had that expression of absolute guilt on his face, and he said, Hannah, I'm so sorry. I didn't want this to happen, but it happened and we have to deal with it. We have to. Like it was a collective problem. Like I had any responsibility in this nightmare. Morgan started crying harder and said something like, I didn't know it would happen. We didn't plan it. It just happened. And my father, my own father, said we needed to be mature about this, that there was a baby on the way and we had to think about what was best for everyone. My mother added that Morgan was young and had made a mistake, but we couldn't punish her for it, that the baby was innocent. And I stood there listening to how my family basically justified the biggest betrayal of my life. No one asked how I felt. No one said, Hannah, we're so sorry for what they did to you. Everything was about Morgan, about her pregnancy, about how we were going to handle the situation. Like I was the problem for being engaged to a man who had gotten my sister pregnant. I don't remember exactly what else was said in those minutes. Honestly, it's all kind of blurry in my memory because I think my brain went into shock mode. But I do remember with absolute clarity the moment I crossed the living room, stood in front of Morgan, and gave her the hardest slap I've ever given in my life. The sound echoed through the whole room and she brought her hand to her cheek with huge eyes. My mother screamed something. Tyler tried to grab my arm, but I pulled away and yelled at him, Don't touch me. Never touch me again. I told them all to go to hell. I told them the wedding was obviously canceled, that I never wanted to see them again in my life. That for me, Morgan had stopped existing as a sister and Tyler as a person. I walked out of that house slamming the door so hard the neighbors probably heard. Got in my car, a 2008 Toyota Corolla I'd bought used, and drove. I drove aimlessly for hours, crying so hard I couldn't even see the road properly. I ended up in the parking lot of a closed supermarket around 11 at night, and I just sat there in the darkness feeling my entire life crumble. The next few days were a logistical and emotional nightmare. I had to cancel everything. And when I say everything, I mean the entire wedding. The venue, the catering, the flowers, the photographer, the band, everything. We lost deposits worth thousands of dollars, like $8,000 total, I think, money that basically went down the drain. I had to call all the guests, over 100 people, and tell them the wedding was canceled. I didn't give details. I just said Tyler and I had decided not to get married. People asked questions, obviously, but I didn't have the energy to explain that my fiancé had gotten my younger sister pregnant. My best friend, Victoria, who I've known since kindergarten, and is basically my real sister, was the only person who was there for me in those days. She helped me pack up all the wedding stuff I had in my apartment, the dress, the test decorations, the invitation samples, and we put them in boxes that we stored in her garage because I couldn't even look at them. I stayed up all night crying, unable to eat, unable to function. I took 2 weeks off work. He said I had a family emergency, which was technically true, and basically existed in a fog of pain. My family tried to contact me. My mother called me like 20 times. My father sent me emails. Even Morgan sent me a long text message asking for forgiveness. I ignored them all. I blocked their numbers, deleted the emails without reading them, deleted social media where they could find me. For me, those people had stopped existing. I didn't want their forgiveness. I didn't want their explanations. I didn't want anything from them. I found out through third parties, a distant cousin who took pity on me, that Tyler and Morgan got married in a private ceremony like 2 weeks after everything exploded. 2 weeks. They didn't waste time. I guess it made sense given that she was pregnant, and apparently they had already decided they wanted to be together. The irony is, They basically used part of what we had planned. They got married at the courthouse on a Friday morning with only both sets of parents present. When I found out, I felt like a new stab in the chest, like the pain just never ended. Months passed, and I tried to move on with my life. But honestly, I wasn't okay. Not at all. I started drinking. First, just a glass of wine at night so I could sleep, then two, then half a bottle. Then I started drinking in the afternoons too. As soon as I got home from work, my work performance started declining because I'd arrive hungover or sometimes still kind of drunk. I stopped seeing my friends, even Victoria, though she kept trying, because I didn't want them to see me turned into this disaster of a person. I gained like 7 kilos because I only ate junk food and drank, or lost like 5 because sometimes I went days without eating properly. Honestly, I don't remember. It was all chaos. Depression consumed me completely. I stopped getting ready, stopped cleaning my apartment, stopped paying some bills on time. There were days when I didn't get out of bed except to go to the bathroom or pour myself another drink. My boss called my attention several times, put me on probation, warned me that if I didn't improve, they were going to fire me. I didn't care. Nothing mattered to me. I felt like someone had turned off a light inside me and only darkness remained. About a year after all this, I lost my job. I arrived late for the 5th time in a month, smelling of alcohol, and my boss simply told me he couldn't continue like this, that he was sorry, but they had to let me go. They gave me a small severance, like the equivalent of 2 months' salary, and I survived another 3 months on that. But the money ran out fast because I spent it mainly on alcohol and on restaurant food because I didn't even cook anymore. One day I realized I couldn't pay my rent. I couldn't pay my rent, I didn't have a job, I didn't have savings I'd spent, them all on the canceled wedding and on alcohol, and I had nowhere to go. I sat on the floor of my empty apartment. I'd sold some furniture to have money, and thought, this is it. I hit rock bottom. I didn't exactly want to die, but I didn't want to keep living like this either. I was in a horrible limbo where I simply existed without really living. I called Victoria, crying. It was like 3 in the morning and I was completely drunk, talking incoherently about how my life had no meaning and how everything was destroyed. She arrived at my apartment in less than half an hour. She lived like 20 minutes away. Came in with the key I'd given her years ago. And when she saw me there lying on the floor surrounded by empty bottles, she just started crying with me. She didn't judge me, didn't lecture me, just hugged me and said, "We're going to fix this together. I promise." Victoria took me to her house that same night. She lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in another part of the city, and told me I could stay in her guest room as long as I needed. She helped me pack my things, the few that remained, and basically rescued me. The next 8 months I lived with her, and honestly, it was like being reborn in some way. She forced me to stop drinking, and when I say forced, I mean literally. She hid all the alcohol in the house and watched over me. She went with me to Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. I went to like 15 before I felt they were helping. She helped me look for work, update my resume, prepare for interviews. They were really hard months. I had relapses. I had days when I just wanted to die. I had nights when I cried myself to sleep. But Victoria never gave up on me. She worked as a nurse at a hospital and had tough shifts, but she always found time to sit with me, to talk, to remind me that I was worth more than what those people had made me feel. Slowly, very slowly, I started to heal. I got a job as an administrative assistant at a small company. I earned, like half of what I earned before, but it was something. I started eating better, exercising occasionally, sleeping at normal hours. I started to feel that maybe, just maybe, I could have a life after all this. 2 years passed since everything exploded. 2 years in which I didn't know anything about Tyler, Morgan, or my parents. For me, it was like they had died. They simply didn't exist in my reality. I was living in my own apartment again, something small but nice. I had my job. I was sober. I had even started going out occasionally with friends. I wasn't completely okay. I still had bad days and nightmares, but I was infinitely better than a year ago. On a normal Wednesday, I was in my office reviewing some reports when I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer because I thought it was spam, but something made me answer. It was a nurse from General Hospital telling me that Tyler had been in a very serious car accident and was in intensive care. I was speechless. I didn't understand why they were calling me until the nurse explained that I still appeared as his emergency contact on his insurance. He'd never updated it after canceling the wedding. She said Tyler had been in surgery for the last 6 hours and his condition was critical. I asked her about Morgan, about his wife, and the nurse said she was there with Tyler's parents and my parents. So why were they calling me? The nurse apologized, said there was confusion with the paperwork and they shouldn't have contacted me, and hung up. I sat at my desk, with the phone in my hand, feeling a million emotions I couldn't even identify. Rage, pain, confusion, but also something like concern that annoyed me to feel. Tyler died 4 days later. He never woke up from the coma. He was 28 years old. I found out because it was on the local news. The accident had been pretty serious. A truck had hit him head-on at an intersection, and because Victoria sent me the link asking if I knew, I said yes. That they'd called me from the hospital, but I hadn't gone. Victoria asked if I wanted to go to the funeral. I told her no, that I had nothing to do there. But I ended up going anyway. I don't know why exactly. I guess I needed some kind of closure or confirmation that he had really died. That this part of my life was definitely over. I went alone, sat all the way in the back of the church where no one could see me, and watched from afar. Morgan was up front with a small girl in her arms. Addison, I assumed, the daughter who had destroyed my life before being born, dressed in black and crying inconsolably. My parents were beside her holding her hand. Tyler's parents were on the other side. Everyone looked destroyed. I didn't stay for the burial. I left mid-ceremony before anyone could notice me. I cried all the way back to my apartment, but I wasn't sure exactly why. Was I crying for Tyler? For the future we never had? For myself? For how absurd the whole situation was? Probably for all of it together. That night, I drank for the first time in months, a glass of wine, and allowed myself to feel all the accumulated pain before putting it away again. I thought that would be it, that Tyler's death would close this chapter definitively. But 2 months later, on a Saturday morning, my mother showed up at my apartment door. I hadn't seen her in like 3 years, and when I opened the door and saw her standing there, I froze. She looked older, with more gray hair, and she was carrying a small girl, Addison. She was like 2.5 at that time, with dark curls and Tyler's eyes. My mother didn't wait for an invitation. She just walked in saying, "We need to talk, Hannah. It's important." I was so shocked I couldn't react fast enough to close the door in her face. I let her in but didn't offer coffee or anything, just sat on the couch with my arms crossed waiting for her to say what she had to say and leave. Addison got down from my mother's lap and started playing with her dolls on the floor, completely oblivious to the tension. My mother took a deep breath and said, "Morgan is sick. Very sick. She was diagnosed with glioblastoma 3 months ago. It's a very aggressive type of brain tumor. The doctors give her between 1 and 4 years to live. Probably closer to 1. And I just sat there processing those words. Morgan, my sister who had betrayed me in the worst possible way, was dying. She was 25 years old and she was dying. I didn't know what to say. I didn't feel the sadness I probably should have felt. I just felt empty and maybe a little guilty for not feeling more. My mother continued saying that Morgan was living with them now because she couldn't take care of herself or take care of Addison, that the treatments were aggressive and they were destroying her. That Morgan cried every day thinking about how her daughter was going to grow up without a mother. Then my mother looked me directly in the eyes and said, "We want to ask you something very big, Hannah. When Morgan dies, we want you to adopt Addison." Tyler's parents are already very old. They were like in their 60s. We're also getting older. And Morgan says she wants her daughter to grow up with someone young who can give her a good life. She thinks you would be perfect. I laughed. I literally laughed in my mother's face because the situation was so absurd I couldn't do anything else. Really? Were they seriously asking me to adopt the daughter of my ex-fiancé and my traitor sister? The girl who was literally the product of their betrayal? The reason my life had been destroyed? And Morgan thought I would be perfect. The nerve was impressive. I told my mother to leave. That no. That 1,000 times no. That how dare they even ask me that? That I didn't owe them anything. That they had chosen Morgan's side years ago, and now they had to live with the consequences. My mother started crying, saying to please consider it. That Addison was innocent in all. This. That she deserved to have a good life. And I said, then find someone else because I'm not going to raise the daughter of the 2 people who hurt me the most in life. She grabbed Addison and left crying. Victoria came that afternoon, after I told her everything on the phone. She told me she completely understood my reaction, but that maybe I should at least think about it for a few days before making a definitive decision. I insisted there was nothing to think about, that my answer was no and would always be no. But she said, "Just think about it for a week. If after a week you still feel the same way, then your answer is definitely no and no one can blame you." That week was torture. I couldn't stop thinking about Addison, about that little girl who wasn't to blame for anything but who was going to lose her mother. I thought about Morgan dying at 25, about how despite everything she'd done to me, I couldn't wish that on anyone. I thought about my parents who were already old and tired. I thought about Tyler's parents who probably didn't have the energy to raise a small child. But I also thought about my mental health, about everything I had fought to recover, about whether it was fair to ask me to sacrifice my peace for a girl who would remind me every day of the worst moment of my life. At the end of the week, I called my mother and told her my answer was no. I couldn't do it. It wasn't that I didn't feel compassion for Addison, but I simply couldn't be the one to raise her. They needed to find another solution. My mother cried again but said she understood, that it was a lot to ask. We hung up and I thought that would be the end of everything. But something inside me couldn't leave things like that. Something gnawed at me. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was morbid curiosity. I don't know. 2 weeks later, I called my mother and told her I wanted to see Morgan. She was surprised but gave me the address of the house. It was my parents' house, where I had grown. And on a day off from work, I went there. Morgan was on the living room couch with a blanket over her legs when I arrived. She looked terrible. Honestly, she had lost all her hair from chemo. She was super thin, had deep dark circles. When she saw me walk in, her eyes filled with tears, and she said my name almost like a whisper. Addison was playing on the floor near her. I sat in a chair on the other side of the room, keeping distance. I don't remember exactly what we said in that first conversation. Morgan cried a lot, apologized over and over, said she had been horrible and selfish, that she understood if I hated her forever, that she didn't expect forgiveness but wanted me to know how sorry she was. I didn't say I forgave her because I wasn't sure if it was true, but I told her I didn't want her to die hating me or me hating her, that maybe we could at least try to have some peace before the end. I started visiting her every 2 weeks or so. At first it was uncomfortable and painful, full of long silences and superficial conversations. But over time, it became a little easier. Morgan would tell me about her treatments, about how Addison kept her fighting even when she wanted to give up. I would tell her about my work, about my life in recovery. He told her about the alcoholism and depression, and she cried, saying how sorry she was. We were never close like we should have been as sisters, but we found something like a truce. Addison started getting to know me during those visits. At first, she avoided me, hid behind Morgan, but eventually warmed up to me. She would bring me her toys to show me, make me drawings, ask if I would come back soon. And I felt something complicated toward her, because on one hand she reminded me of all the pain, but on the other hand she was just an innocent child who hadn't asked to be born into this messed up situation. 3 years passed like this. 3 years in which I watched Morgan deteriorate slowly. She had good periods, where she seemed better, and terrible periods where she could barely get out of bed. Addison turned 5 and Morgan organized a small party at my parents' house. I went, brought a gift, a doll Addison had mentioned wanting, and for the first time in years I sat at the table with my whole family. It was weird, but not as horrible as I thought it would be. Morgan died on a Tuesday in autumn, exactly 3 years after our reconciliation. I was at work when my mother called crying to tell me it had happened that morning, peacefully, with the whole family around. I asked for the rest of the day off and went to my apartment, where I cried for hours. I cried for everything. For the lost years. For the sister who could have been but never was. For Addison, who was now orphaned of both parents. For how messed up and unfair life was. The funeral was small. I went, and this time I sat up front with the family. Addison was confused, asking why Mommy wouldn't wake up. My parents tried to explain that. Mommy had gone to heaven, but she didn't really understand. I held her hand during the ceremony and she squeezed mine tightly. After the funeral, my parents and Tyler's parents met to discuss Addison's future. They decided among everyone that the grandparents would raise her, with my parents taking the main role since they had a bit more energy. They asked me if I wanted to be involved in her life in some way. I told them yes, that I could be her aunt, that I could visit her and be there for her when she needed me, but that I couldn't be her mother. I couldn't. And they understood. Now I see Addison like once a month. I take her to the park, to the movies, for ice cream. I buy her gifts for her birthday and Christmas. I text my parents asking how she is. She calls me Aunt Hannah and tells me about school and her friends. Sometimes she asks me about her mom and dad, and I tell her the good things I remember, because she deserves to have good memories of them. Despite everything. Have I completely forgiven Morgan? I don't know. Some days I think yes. Other days I feel the rage and pain like it happened yesterday. Have I forgiven Tyler? It's harder because he died without us having a chance to really talk. Have I forgiven my parents? We're working on that. The relationship is better, but there are deep scars that may never fully heal. What I do know is that I made peace with the situation as much as possible. I didn't adopt Addison, and I don't feel guilty about it, because it would have been unsustainable for my mental health. But I didn't completely abandon her either, because she really isn't to blame for anything. I found a balance that works for me, and that's the best I can do. Life doesn't always give you perfect endings or poetic justice. It just gives you what it gives you, and you have to decide how to move forward anyway.